Welcome to the CanMed Coffee Talk podcast, where we talk with the leading minds in cannabis science, medicine, cultivation, and safety testing. I am your host, Ben Amaralt. I am the Senior Marketing Manager at Medicinal Genomics and proud member of the team that puts on the CanMed Summit. Well, I hope you've had the chance to check out the updated canmedevents.com to see a preview of our new location for the CanMed 25 Summit, which will take place June 17th through 20th at the Wyndham Resort in Rio Grande, Puerto Rico. We will be adding more details to the site in the coming weeks and months, so be sure to sign up for email alerts so you can get all of those announcements. We have also added all of the CanMed 24 presentation videos to our CanMed archive, so be sure to check those out as well. My guest today is Dr. Harold Hahn. Harold is Chief Science Officer and co-founder of Vertosa, and a pioneer in water-compatible cannabinoid ingredients for infused products. Harold designed the industrial-leading cannabis emulsions that are widely applied in the cannabis beverage brands. He also holds 16 patents in emulsion applications, and prior to founding Vertosa, he had led a team that developed the emulsification oil for Biorad's digital Droplet PCR system. Harold also publishes a regular series explaining the science of cannabis for product makers under the name The Happy Chemist, a nickname you'll understand after you watch this interview. One of his recent articles describes the different factors that contribute to cannabis beverage potency loss, which is a challenge for beverage brands. In fact, in regulated markets, it's common to see a 10 to 15% variation in potency compared to label claims. In unregulated hemp-derived beverages, it can be even higher. During our conversation, we discuss the difference between cannabis beverages and alcoholic beverages, what happens when cannabinoids oxidize, how to put THC into water-based products using physical and chemical processes, how every aspect of the supply chain can lead to potency loss in cannabis beverages, which beverage ingredients accelerate potency loss, how packaging conditions can affect scalping and oxidation rates, and more. Before we get to my conversation with Harold, I'd like to thank this episode's sponsor, Vertosa. Vertosa creates industry-leading active ingredients for infused product makers. Their patent-pending nano and micro emulsions are carefully designed for the specific needs of each customer, and their pre-suspended aqueous solutions empower them to create incredibly homogeneous and stable products while maximizing bioavailability, clarity, and taste. Learn more at vertosa.com. Okay, without any further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Harold Hahn. Good morning, Harold. Thanks so much for joining us on the podcast.
Good morning, Ben. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm excited to talk with you today about cannabis beverages. It's one of the fastest growing segments in the cannabis market, but it's not without its challenges. And regulators, consumers will often compare cannabis beverages to alcohol. So I guess my first question to you is that a fair comparison, and how are they different?
That's a very good question, because alcohol is what consumer and regulator know for hundreds of years, which is a beverage that is adult use, that can change your mindset, that can be impairing you, right? And from those aspects, cannabis beverage are similar to alcohol. By cannabis beverage, maybe we can just single say THC beverages, right? Because CBD beverages have different impairment issues. So if you compare THC beverages with alcohol, the main comparison, the main difference are the active compounds. So for one is ethanol, right? Alcohol. One is THC. And ethanol is water soluble, right? THC is oil soluble. So that is the fundamental difference between the two actives. So what actually leads from that is when ethanol is water soluble, it's actually easier to be incorporated into all kinds of different beverages, right? It's easy to dilute. And it doesn't, the fundamental features of alcohol is it doesn't scop, meaning it doesn't attach to the can liners or any packaging, right? And it doesn't oxidize. So you can say you can save a liquor for 200 years. You reopen that, it still have the same content of the liquor, right? But on the other hand, THC is very easy to be oxidized, right? And the oxidation rate is like a constant. So you have to work around it. But also THC, because of the hydrophobicity, you have to have different technology to get the THC into the beverages. And by doing that, due to this hydrophobicity, the THC will tend to stuck to different packagings or can be sensitive to heat, sensitive to other ingredients, right? So that's where the cannabis beverage as a whole subject to, more potency loss issues compared to alcohol beverages.
Right. So you mentioned oxidation. So what happens when these cannabinoids oxidize? Like what?
Yeah. Well, fundamentally, from the surface, you lose potency, right? That's from the COA, you see that, okay, potency dropped. But deeper down into what really happened to the cannabinoids, I think more research are needed here. For example, we know THC, the oxidizing end result is CBN, but usually we don't see a one-to-one conversion, right? So you lose one molecule of THC, usually you don't see a formation of one molecule of CBN. So that indicates some other molecules are formed along this path, right? So what are those molecules? I think, this is where I strongly advocate for more funding and research, especially as a cannabis beverage as a whole category, research on that category.
Now, is this oxidation a challenge for other forms of cannabis products beyond beverages?
I believe so. We have heard, the joints, the flowers, they all oxidize, right? The terpenes get lost over time, over the shelf life. But I think beverage is unique form factor because, for example, our technology, we drive down the droplet size, right, to the nanometer size, from 200 nanometers to 1,000 nanometers. So that formation give a much larger surface area, right? So, which is great for the onset purpose, so consumer can feel the effect much quicker. But on the other hand, those enlarged surface area will have more oxygen attacking to the cannabinoids. So the oxidation rate between a joint to a beverages could be different. So that's why I advocate, the research should be focusing on its own category, right? I would really hope, more university and researchers are open to study cannabis beverages.
Great. No, and you touched on a great point there, and I'm hoping that you can explain. So we talked about how cannabinoids, they are hydrophobic, and so to try to put them into a beverage is challenging, right? So what is that technology? And I know you mentioned emulsion and everything. So maybe, let's get basic with it. Like, how are these products made?
Yes. So let's talk about how to put THC into water-based product, right? Because THC is oil soluble. So in my opinion, there are two main school of thoughts. One is chemical modification, one is physical modification. So chemical modification is you change the structure of THC's chemical structure. You add some functional groups to make it water soluble, to make THC as a sugar or salt. It has its own challenges of this path because you are creating a prodrug, a new molecule, right? And you need to study the safety and efficacy of the new molecule. Another route is the physical route, which is the main application for most of the beverage now. The physical route is, even though THC is not water soluble, but you change the form factor of the THC. For us, for example, we use nano emulsion as a subcategory of the emotion category. The emotion can be divided into non-emotion and macro-emotion, the two parts, right? So we are a non-emotion. They are not defined by the size. Actually, they are defined by the energy level. So by how you produce the emotion. But either way, the end result is the emotion process make the THC distillate into billions of smaller droplets, and they coat each droplet with a layer of surfactants, emulsifiers. Depending on the emulsifier origin, it can be synthetic, it can be natural derived, it can be organic derived. At Vertosa, we only use organic derived emulsifier, which are safe and widely available to consumers. So yeah, that's the basic gist.
So you break the distillate or the molecules into smaller fragments and then coat it with a more water soluble compound, or
Yes,
that makes
right.
sense. And then mix it in, and it kind of stays in suspension and is homogeneous.
Right. So we essentially we change how THC exists from a big molecule, from a big aggregation of distillate into smaller aggregates of droplets, and which are coated by a layer of surfactants, and the surfactants make that droplets water compatible. So these droplets can flow inside the liquid beverages freely.
Excellent. All right. So that's probably a good segue into talking about. So you recently wrote an article on LinkedIn explaining some of the challenges for this potency loss. And you kind of kicked it off saying that you did a poll of your followers to asking what they think is the most important factor in, preventing potency loss. And it seemed like most people thought it was sort of this emulsion technology or the infusion technology, which is what you were describing. So first of all, do you agree with that assessment? And why do you think people think that that is the most important?
Um, I have seen issues of the downstream potency issues happening, and the root cause could be the emotion, right? I have seen that. But I also have seen many other areas along the supply chain of making the cannabis beverages. When any of the sector has issues or problems, the accumulated effect is contributing to the end results, which is potency loss. So yes, the infusion tech is very important because it's complex, right? Because the infusion tech itself needs to be stable, right? And then when you put that infusion tech, the emulsion or whatever technology into the beverages, it needs to be stable in the beverage. So the self-stability and the beverage stability are two aspects, right? So sometimes it's hard to assume you have a stable emulsion by itself and you're gonna have a stable product. No, we have seen this failure time and time again, and you have to really assess like the two lanes, right? Make sure you have a stable emulsion, but also this is the most interesting part and complex part because emulsion could be 2 to 3 formulas or 4 formulas. This could be 1,000 SKUs, right? They are having different pHs, they have different ingredients, heat stability, packaging. So it's really the wild part of expanding the emulsion into the finished product. So that's where Vertosa actually spent a lot of time understanding our clients from the industry. Okay, what kind of beverage formulation they are, what kind of packaging, co-manufacturers, a testing lab. So I know you're going to dive into it, but that's essentially the whole supply chain that could potentially impact the potency.
Yeah, no, and you're right. We're going to get into kind of the different parts of the supply chain. But before we get onto that, I wanted to ask, so when we're talking about losing potency, how much are we talking about here? Like, is there sort of a standard rate of potency loss?
Um, if you ask me the standards, for beverages, there are regulated beverages by states, and there are hemp beverages. So
Right.
if you ask by state, there is a 10 to 15% variation from the label claim, right? But if you ask me about hemp beverages so far, there is no strict regulation yet, right? So which the industry, I know they're advocating for better regulation, better standards. So yeah, the hemp beverages could have a huge loss over the shelf life, right? The shelf life they brands claimed, and some brands may have you know not as much lost over the shelf life. Some brands may have a huge loss. So we see this huge difference, and we see there's big need for the industry to better ourselves because consumer love this product and
Yep.
consumer need this product. And if we don't do a good job to, if we lose the trust of consumers and they say, okay, all those hemp beverages are finicky and they don't give me enough milligrams on the claim, I think that's detrimental to the whole thing. So that's where Vertosa as a we try to lead the conversation and educate our partners and clients. Hey, you need to pay attention to all the details that leads to potency loss. You can't just assume you had a good emulsion, you have a good co-manufacturer, then everything's fine, right? So that's where we want to try to educate people.
Yeah. And I have to imagine with so many different brands out there and so many different products, using so many different technologies that without sort of that standardization, like you're right. I mean, some consumers might experience a potency loss with one brand and sort of apply that to everyone else, where that's not really the case.
Right. Right. I feel the history we're early, right?
Yeah.
It's 2024. We're early in this cannabis beverage sector, and more research are needed, more regulation are needed, right? So I'm strongly advocate for those to happen.
All right. All right. So let's dive into the supply chain here. So maybe we'll start with can you tell us what are sort of the 7 parts of the cannabis beverage supply chain?
Yeah, sounds like a book title. Uh, so it starts from the cannabis input, right? THC, CBD, CBN. So input, and then goes next step is the infusion tech, right? Either emulsion or powder or some other infusion technology. And then the infusion technology will go into formulation. That's where the beverage base is formulated, the flavors, all the other ingredients. You put emulsion into the beverage base, and then you have to select the packaging, right? Can, glass, PETs, and then you figure all that out. You give all this formula to the co-manufacturer who produce the beverages for you, right? And after you produce it, you send to the lab, right? And the lab will test for the potency, and then the final finished product will go into distribution or retail. So those are the main 7 steps for the supply chain.
Excellent. All right. So let's start at the beginning with cannabinoid input. How can that stage sort of affect potency loss down at the end?
Yeah. So the main thing is the how easy is the cannabinoids be oxidized. We know from our early data, we have seen THC and THCV as the easiest to be oxidized and the quickest, right? Well, CBD and CBG are following, right? They are slower, but they still oxidize. And CBC and CBN are behind that, right? As the third category, they are much slower, but they do. Even though CBN, is kind of stable on theory, but from our early preliminary study, we have seen CBN get lost in beverage too. So again, we still need answers of what it becomes to, right? Over time, what does the oxidation do to the cannabinoids? So this is where I hope more research are needed.
Right. So THC is one of the fastest to oxidize. That's inconvenient, huh?
Inconvenient, yes. Yes.
Okay, so infusion tech is the next phase, and I think we sort of already touched on that, unless you think that there's more to talk about how that can sort of affect the potency loss here.
Yeah, I mean, infusion tech, like I said, it's a very dual concept. People regard infusion tech as simple, right? Because producing emulsions are relatively straightforward, but actually it's complex. It's especially when you put that ingredients into the products, right? That complexity generates through this process.
Great. Okay, so now beverage formulation. Can you talk about some of the different components that are going into beverages and how they present different challenges?
Yeah, well, beverage usually has over 90% water. That's that's the main thing, right? But then the rest, 5 to 10%, you have flavors, right? You have functions, functional groups like THC or vitamins or electrolytes, right? Um, you know, polyphenols, stuff like that. And then you have a supporting ingredients like preservatives, pH modulators. So essentially, those are, in my opinion, the three main things.
Right. And so how can they sort of affect how your emulsion works, or how potency can
Yeah.
be lost?
So far, I think Vertosa has been infusing over 1,000 SKUs on the market, and we have been collecting data of the 1,000 SKUs. What's their density, pH, Brix, color, taste, what's the profile, and we have seen that certain brands, certain clients, they have the same packaging, same emulsion, same co-manufacturer, but they have different flavors. And strange enough, just that flavor difference will cause a potency difference, right? Especially in the beginning of the dosing or long-term shelf life. And again, this is where um, I think the industry need mainstream knowledge and mainstream help, because we as Vertosa, we are small, right? And the whole industry is small. We all try to figure this out, but the complex of the base really need beverage experts to help us understand why certain ingredients, down to the mechanism, is impacting the potency loss, right? So I think we have to admit we see some causation, A causes B, but we don't know why this happened, right? But my goal is to create a naughty list of ingredients. Naughty list, like if you currently using our current infusion tech of THC, maybe try to avoid those 5 or 6 ingredients in your beverages until we figure out a technology can be compatible with those ingredients. So that's where we are as Vertosa. But I think one of the things I'm proud of is Doller. It's a big German company in the beverage ingredient space, and Vertosa and Doller have some research collaboration in this topic, and we are really excited about bringing mainstream players who have years of decades of experience on formulation to help us.
Interesting. So a naughty list of ingredients. Interesting.
Naughty list. Yes.
Do you have any? I know you said you're working on it, but are there any that you know of yet, or are you still doing the research there?
Couple of things I can mention. Electrolytes could be potentially a problem. Polyphenols sometimes could be a problem. Some flavors, but those flavors we're still studying, right? But those are the two, top of proteins, for example, could cause a problem. Yeah.
So I guess as a consumer, if we're looking at beverages and potentially to make a purchase, are there certain ones that should be avoided, or maybe are more prone to maybe a potency loss, or ones that are kind of more stable?
I think I don't know the answer, because I would love to know more of the consumer feedbacks, right? I think we're getting there, but I don't think the whole industry has a lot of consumer feedback. How does consumer like the flavor? How do they like each brands? What is their determining factor? Is the flavor? Is the effect?
Yeah.
Is the onset or something else, or the packaging? So yeah, I would love to see more data from consumers, and then I can tell you how we can educate them. But now I feel like what is encouraging is consumer now, given the trial from the hemp beverages going to the mainstream, they seem to like it. They seem to be desiring for it, because they want to find something to replace alcohol. So this is fitting right into that category. So that's a very encouraging.
No, absolutely. And I could say personally, I've seen more people sort of moving towards cannabis beverages to replace alcohol. And I have to say, flavor is certainly one of the biggest considerations because there's some out there that don't taste that great.
Right, right. And flavor is the first layer of sensory, right? Because
Yeah.
you buy the cannabis beverage for an effect, and flavor is the first layer of effect. That does this generate a joyful experience for you?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and if we're looking at alcohol too, I mean, that's where a lot of people base their decisions on alcohol as well. Do you like red or white wine or, you know?
It's the same ethanol.
Right, exactly. Yeah, you're not just drinking straight ethanol. That's for sure. Okay, so we talked about beverage formulation. Oh, actually, no, one thing before we move on from that, I noticed in the write-up that you were talking about scalping rates. What is that well, what is that?
Right. Scalping is a term used in the beverage industry for a long time. It describes the process of active ingredients in the beverages attaching to the packaging because the packaging material could be hydrophobic, right? It lacks oil. So when you have oil-like uh, ingredients, it may stuck to the liner, right? And then lose its potency in the liquid. So that process is called scalping.
Okay. Well, that's a good segue because we're going to talk about packaging next. So,
Yes,
yeah, so maybe talk about some of the different liner types that are available and how they can sort of affect those scalping rates.
great. Funny enough, I just published an article last Friday talking about can liner types. And yeah, the can liner is kind of a big issue for the whole industry. Um, and we have 6 years ago in California, nobody's using can. Everybody's using glass because all the infusion technology are not stable in a can. And I think this is the first issue Vertosa have helped the industry solve. We were working with Ball, PPG, all the big can companies and liner companies. We test all their generations of liners and we summarized, okay, and we improve our formula. We summarized, okay, what formula works in what liner. And so today, I think we can confidently make a 12 months stable beverages with a good emulsion in a good liner, a good combination. But at the same time, when the hemp beverages brands are uh, going to the market in the very fast speed, right? They get what they can get, right? Which is understandable as a market, but sometimes that leads to a neglect of the quality of the liners. So we have seen issues that clients picked the wrong liners, and the wrong liners will lead to much higher potency scalping, right?
Hmm.
And those are the continuous issues Vertosa is wanting to educate our clients.
Great. So now, did I hear correctly that this isn't so much an issue with glass?
Yes, you're right.
And so what are some of the advantages of using cans versus glass? I mean, if you don't have the issue with glass, why don't we see more brands using glass?
Right. I think it's the heaviness of the logistic shipping and the recyclability, right? And I think those are the two on the cost.
Mm,
Yeah.
great. Okay. So in addition to scalping, one of the other things that you mentioned was oxygen ingress and kind of leading to that oxidation. So how is that a factor?
Interesting. Yeah. So like I said, oxygen is kind of the big enemy for cannabis beverages. Actually, um, I I advocate for our industry to use beer as a benchmark because when you make a beer, if you have high oxygen, the flavor will change dramatically
Right.
in a very short time. So beer industry has perfected their practice on lower the DO, dissolved oxygen during the production, right? So that's why what we advocate our co-packer of the cannabis beverages to follow the practice of beer. So imagine you have a packaging that has low oxygen to start with, right? But if the packaging somehow allows oxygen to come in from its seal or from the body or from anywhere, then it doesn't matter. You have a low DO to start. Dissolved oxygen will continue to climb up and then the cannabinoids will be continuously to be oxidized, right? So that's where we see this potential issue, especially from PET bottles, because PET, the whole bottle, will allow oxygen coming in constantly. But not only PET, some glass bottles with chill-resistant cap, right? Or even some can with a special lids, right? May potentially ingress oxygen. So we are having some research collaboration with a lab right now to further look into this. This seems to be an easy concept to understand, but actually it's very complex to test because you have to remove the oxygen, you have to control the environment. So this is nearly a year process right now with our testing partners. So stay tuned for this data.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, no, and that's an interesting point because I mean, at least with the cannabis beverages I've used, yeah, it's not your standard kind of lid that you would see on a can of Coke or a beer or something like that. It's sort of that child-proof, tamper-proof tab. So that can actually lead to more oxygen ingress, you're saying? Potentially?
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Okay. So we talked about so just kind of, I guess, to sum up packaging, sounds like there's two main things that you're trying to prevent here, and that's the scalping of, sort of the molecules attaching to the liner of the actual packaging. So it's not actually getting to the consumer when they consume it. And it's this oxidation, right? Those are the two sort of main problems you're trying to solve for.
Yes. And to summarize it, one is physical, one is chemical.
Interesting. Perfect. All right, so now let's talk about beverage manufacture. How I can imagine a number of different ways that can introduce some problems.
Right. So interestingly, there's a joke that Vertosa, we don't make beverages, right? But we work with a lot of co-manufacturers. So we're not golfers, but we're good caddies. We have seen golfers make mistakes here and there. So to level up the whole industry, Vertosa actually, we drafted a cannabis beverage manufacturing handbook. So in this handbook is 100 pages long handbook. We include every element from weighing the ingredients, introducing the ingredients, control the dissolved oxygen, how to test tank, how to package. Yeah, it's a lot, right? Because the main issue I see is producing beverages is easy, right? A lot of companies can make that. But cannabis beverage is different. It's a hybrid between regular beverages and the pharmaceutical layer because you have to guarantee each can get 10.5 milligrams, right? So, and previously the beverage commands, their main belief is, okay, I drop this bag of ingredients into the tank. It should be there. It's homogeneous, right? It should be there. For example, if I make a probiotic drink, like I claim 10 grams of fiber per can, right, on the label. Nobody's measured that and ensure you each can get 10 grams of fiber. 8 grams of 12 grams, consumer okay with it. Right? But cannabis is different. So I think that fundamentally, this concept needs to change in the operator's head. They are making a pharmaceutical-like beverages, right? So that, that leads to the THC is easy to be changed by oxidation, by scalping, and the weighing, right, and the residue of the emulsion. So all the details could potentially lead to a failed product. So that's where the handbook really emphasizes on what you should pay attention to, and changing the concept. It's not a regular beverages; it's a medicine.
Yeah, no, and you're right. It introduces a number of different variables because you could develop a great product, but then you have to turn it over to the manufacturer to actually, produce it at scale. So if they're not paying attention to those details, it's not going to be the same quality that you started with, right?
Right. Yes, I do believe this whole industry need standardization, and
Yeah.
one of the main part is the standardized operation in producing the beverages.
Right. No, and then so you touched on something, homogeneity, which I know kind of dovetails into our next topic of of the testing of the actual product, right? And so talk about that. How can that lead to an issue with potency loss? The actual testing, the labeling, and then comparing it to what's actually in the can at the end of the day.
Right. I think the testing lab may have three categories of issues, right? The first category is inherent because nationwide we don't have a standardized standard material, right? So you buy different standard materials, they can be just off by purity, right?
Yep.
From batch to batch even. So that's inherent. Another issue is integrity of the lab, right? So some labs give you an inflate potency. Mm-hmm. Some lab will pander to your potency claim on the label, and they know you want 5 milligram. Okay, I'll give you 4.8. What's that, right? So I have heard that happening in multiple labs. So that's integrity issue. And another issue is the technology issue. Is the when you infuse over 1,000 SKUs, you start to find certain flavors or ingredients in the beverage may need a special extraction method because we have seen an early sign of this. We're still completing our observation here, but we have observed certain ingredients like cream or fat in the beverages will hold on to the THC, not letting go, right? Mm-hmm. So you need to design a new method, a stronger method to extract the THC from the beverages. So you see that actually is, bottom line is maybe the 1,000 SKUs do not need one single method. Maybe you have to develop 3 or 4 methods to really see, okay, what ingredients will follow what extraction method.
Right. Now, do you do any of that testing in-house at Vertosa, or do you use third-party labs?
We use third-party labs. The main reason is we understand how finicky the data could be. And even from lab to lab, they have variations, right? So so that's why we trust Unresco in San Francisco. They are a DEA, FDA certified lab with 80 years of history of running food samples. And so that is at least our anchor of accuracy and consistency. We often use Unresco to compare to other labs. But there are great labs out there, like Infinite Chemical, like Cambian Labs in Michigan. So there are good labs over there, ACT Labs. But Smithers, I'm just mentioning a few that we work with. They are great. But there are many labs that just they're smaller. They're trying to figure out the supply chain, and I don't blame them. It's a hard business. Yeah, running a lab is hard. It's a lot of details, a lot of investment on the dollars. Yeah, a lot of training is hard.
Yeah, no, we feel it too. We work with a lot of testing labs, and definitely feel the challenges that they face. And yeah, and you bring up one that's constantly coming up is that cannabis is being infused into all different things these days, from beverages to edibles to candies to topicals, and to sort of develop methods to reliably deal with all of those different matrices is hard.
Exactly. Yeah. You didn't mention condiments. I think it's going to be a good sector, a fun sector.
Condiments, yeah. Infused ketchup?
Yes. Hot sauce.
Oh yeah, hot sauce would be nice. All right, great. So we're at the end of the supply chain here, distribution. So I imagine, storage conditions, things like that could really cause issues with potency.
Right. Especially tied to the relation of oxidation. And oxidation will happen at higher temperature. So, and we know that with the climate change, in the truck, when the truck going to Florida or Texas, it's going to be hot in a truck if it's not specially made for a cold chain supply. So how do the impact for a beer or liquor, it may be different compared to a THC because of the oxidation issue.
Wow. So temperature is really an issue. What temperature is sort of the ideal range for these beverages?
I say do not go over 35 to 40 degrees C, right? So that's kind of my suggestion, because the reason is Canada and Michigan, the regulators use 40 degrees C as their accelerating testing condition. So you don't want to store your beverages in accelerated conditions for research studies, right? So try to avoid, get lower to 40 degrees C.
Right. All right. All right. So we did it. We got through, we got through the supply chain.
Great.
That was great. All right. So winding down here, Harold, tell us a little bit more about Vertosa, what you guys are working on, and how people can learn more.
Great. So Vertosa has been in the business for 6 years. We just had our sixth anniversary party last week in our headquarters in Berkeley, California. Thank you. And we are fortunate to have this business. Oftentimes we ask ourselves, is this real, right? Selling a water compatible cannabinoids as a business, is unfathomable 6 years ago. And but also seeing the fruit that we build with our clients and partners through the supply chain, and seeing the impact of just cannabis beverage to every consumer in America. And it's a strong belief for us to experience this journey. But there's a lot to do, and our focus is continue perfecting our infusion tech. There are still a lot to learn, right? We are leading the industry, but I have to admit, we still have a lot to answer. And in order to find the answers, I don't think we can go along. I think we should collaborate. We should find more collaboration. We should support more researchers, even competitors, among this industry. We need to learn from each other. We need to encourage each other and propel the industry. I don't think any company can work in silo to have, okay, I own this or something. So that's my advocate for, okay, more researchers, more collaboration throughout the industry.
No, and that's perfect. I mean, that aligns perfectly with what we're trying to do with CanMed, is to try to bring together all the top minds in cultivation, medicine, in science, of course, to bring them together to learn from each other, so that we can push this thing forward, because we agree. It's going to take all of us working together to see this thing forward. Competitors, doesn't matter. We can all learn from each other. So maybe one last question I want to ask you from a consumer standpoint. If you're looking for cannabis beverages, are there certain things that you should be looking for to sort of evaluate maybe higher quality versus lower quality, or, maybe not so much quality, but, about the things that we talked about here? Are there sort of indicators that we could look for to be like, okay, this is a good choice?
Okay, so if you talk about if you're evaluating a alcohol brands, beer, or let's say beer, right, compared to low dose THC beverages, beer usually is flavor and packaging, right? How does it taste? For cannabis beverage, we discussed sensory flavor is still the first category of judgment. But I think I want to advocate to the consumers, cannabis beverage has this effect, right? The effect actually is what you're paying for. It's not, you're not paying for a good tasting beverages. You can buy that from Costco very cheaply, right?
Right.
But you are paying for an effect that alcohol doesn't give you. So I think the consumer needs to pay more attention to, after I drink this, pay attention to how you feel, right? What is the onset? Initially, when can you feel something? And after you feel something, how is that time point to the peak? I call it the ramp, right? How does the ramp feel like? Is that apparent, or sometimes you lose the ramp? Sometimes you feel something, but it's going out, right? You feel something is going out. So is the ramp clear? And then when did you peak, right? And then how long the peak lasts, and when did you wear off? I think it's fun to do this. It's not it's fun to collect and record, and then you can compare between different SKUs, between different products. How does the product make you feel? I think it's more important than how does the product taste like.
Excellent. All right, Harold. Thanks again for taking the time. I'd love to put some links in the show description to some of the resources that you mentioned, especially that handbook. That sounds fantastic. Thanks again for doing it, and hope to see you down in Puerto Rico next year
Oh,
for CanMed.
Puerto Rico. Great. I look forward to it.
All right.